Greetings, everyone. My name's Jeff Norby, and I'd like to welcome you to this spotlight lecture on classical conditioning. And we're going to start out with a definition of both learning and conditioning. In psychology, we typically define learning as a relatively permanent change in either behavior or understanding due to past experience, right? We learn through experience. And the simplest form of learning is when we learn to associate two stimuli together, or two things together, I should say, such as smoke and fire, or thunder and lightning, um, or even a subtle facial expression with one of our loved ones and a certain attitude. Um, Conditioning can be very subtle. So, and we're going to look at two types of conditioning in this learning plan. We're going to look at classical conditioning. We're going to look at operant conditioning. And here I'll just give you a little taste of classical conditioning today to get you started. So on the screen here you see Ivan Pavlov, Russian physiologist and arguably the most recognizable face in all of psychology. Interestingly enough, he was not a psychologist, but instead a physiologist, and he was studying the digestive processes of dogs. In fact, he won a Nobel Prize, not for psychology, because there is no Nobel Prize in psychology, and not even for classical conditioning, but for the digestive processes of dogs in 1904. So while he's studying his dogs in an apparatus like the one below, and he was giving them meat powder and collecting saliva with these tubes on the side of the dog's mouth, what he noticed is that the dogs would not only salivate to the meat powder, but they would also salivate upon his entry into the room, upon the entry of an assistant, the closing of a door before, that reliably came before they got fed, and he came to the conclusion that anything that reliably came before the food went into the dog's mouth, or the meat powder went into the dog's mouth, would in fact produce the same response. And so then what he did is he systematically altered the stimuli to see exactly what would and what would not bring such a response. So this is a typical Pavlovian experiment here, and language is going to become very important in this learning plan. So we'll go through a 4-panel example here. So the dog is presented with a tuning fork, the ring of a tuning fork, and notice there's no response. That is to say that dogs have no innate or inborn response to tuning forks, but they do have an inborn response to food. And so here we see the words unconditioned stimulus and unconditioned response. That food stimulates the dog to salivate. That food would also stimulate you or I to salivate if put on our tongue. It's an automatic response. The mouth salivates to aid digestion. And this frame is where the learning or the conditioning takes place. This is the frame that we would call the acquisition period. What's happening here is the unconditioned stimulus is presented, and we get the same unconditioned response of salivating. But right before the unconditioned stimulus is presented, the neutral stimulus is presented. So it's tuning fork, food, salivate. Tuning fork, food, salivate. Timing becomes very important here in two respects. One, there has to be multiple and many pairings of the tuning fork with the food. And second, the tuning fork for ideal conditioning to take place should come right before the food. Specifically for optimal conditioning, that tuning fork should come 0.2 to 2 seconds before the food is presented. And then if in time the tuning fork alone causes the dog to salivate, we then say that that's no longer a neutral stimulus, it's now a conditioned stimulus. You now have a dog that salivates to a tuning fork, right? How impressive. And your dog is now conditioned. That's a conditioned response. When dogs are born, they do not salivate to tuning forks. So here is the language that you're going to come to learn and love, and your instructor will use throughout this learning plan. We have 4 key terms: the unconditioned stimulus, the unconditioned response. These unconditioned items are inborn. They're innate. No learning is necessary for these. If somebody throws hot water at you, you will move. That's innate. If somebody injects a needle into your arm, you're going to flinch. That's innate. You need not be taught this. And then the two on the bottom are learned. Thus the C for conditioned, learned, conditioned stimulus and conditioned response. So we learn to flinch when we go to have blood taken and the tech says to us, this isn't going to hurt a bit. And then she punches us with the needle, or he punches us with the needle. We've learned across time that when somebody says this isn't going to hurt a bit, right after that there's something that does hurt. So what we have here is what's called stimulus-stimulus learning. That is, an unconditioned stimulus, the poke of a needle, is paired with a neutral stimulus, and that neutral stimulus is this isn't going to hurt a bit. That becomes a conditioned stimulus. So it's stimulus-stimulus pairing, stimulus-stimulus learning. I know these are very difficult terms. If you've never been exposed to them, you probably haven't been. These will be challenging, but understanding these will be at the heart of understanding classical conditioning. So let's look at a non-Pavlovian example here. Let's get away from the dogs for a minute here and just look at these terms. The description here of the terms are exactly the same, but now we see another scenario on the screen. What's going to happen here is we're going to condition this woman to blink when she hears an 8,000 hertz tone. Okay, humans can have a range from about 20 to 20,000 hertz, and humans reflexively blink when air is blown into their eye. Okay, but they don't blink when they hear an 8,000 hertz tone, unless they're taught to do so, unless they're conditioned to do so. So we have a speaker here. We have an air puff device set up on this woman's face, and we are going to, through experience, because we learn through experience, we're conditioned through experience, we're going to pair two stimuli together, and the two stimuli are the air puff and the 8,000 hertz tone, and we're going to condition this woman to blink to an 8,000 hertz tone. And here's how we're going to do it. We're going to start with an air puff. And when we puff air into her eye, that's an unconditioned stimulus, which leads to an unconditioned response. We say it elicits the unconditioned response. And the reason we use the word elicit is because she's not choosing to blink. She will blink because it's an innate response. The air puff brings forth or elicits the response. Then, this is what we call our acquisition period. This is the key to classical conditioning right here. It's the pairing of those two stimuli, the NS and the US. NS and the US. So we're still blowing an air puff into her eye, but right before we do that, we present an 8,000 hertz tone. So it's 8,000 hertz, air puff, she blinks. 8,000 hertz, air puff, she blinks. She's blinking because of the air puff, but repeatedly, over and over and over again, we present the neutral stimulus with the unconditioned stimulus. Not only do we present them repeated number of times, but they're presented in close proximity. The time between the neutral stimulus and the unconditioned stimulus is just a second or less. And in time, what happens is when we play the 8,000 hertz tone alone, she blinks, and at that point, we can say that we have conditioned this woman to blink to an 8,000 hertz tone. Okay, since people don't do this innately, she's learned to do this. She has been conditioned. And we're going to finish with this statement here at the bottom, which really strikes at the heart of classical conditioning. And it is any stimulus that an organism can perceive, and we use the word organism because humans and animals are conditioned in much the same way. Any stimulus that the organism can perceive is capable of eliciting any response that the organism is capable of making. And what this means is we can condition her if she can detect the stimulus and if she's capable of the response. So just as an example here, can we condition her to blink to a 30,000 hertz tone? Well, she's capable of blinking, but she's not capable of hearing a 30,000 hertz tone because humans can't hear above about 20,000 hertz. So no, that would be difficult to do. Can we condition her to jump 2 feet when hearing an 8,000 hertz tone? Yes, we probably could, because she can hear an 8,000 hertz tone and she's capable of jumping 2 feet in the air, most likely. We'd have to set up another apparatus here, but she could do it. So you're going to hear about many other very practical examples of classical conditioning, many of them dealing with animals. Some of them are companion animals. Um, Another great example would be simply your cat or your dog running to the cupboard, to the sound of the cupboard, or to the sound of the can opener that reliably precedes them getting food. They've been classically conditioned. So there's many, many examples. I hope this little tutorial was useful for you. Hope this gets you off on the right foot. This is typically a learning plan with many real-life applications. So enjoy and have a good time.